Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Okay guys, so a couple weeks ago you saw the first part of this video idea, which was me reacting to your unpopular book opinions. And in that video I was talking about the fact that I do think that there's somewhat of a distinction between truly unpopular opinions versus things that are like a minority opinion, or, and I think we'll get more into this, things where both sides of an opinion feel really strongly about something, and both of them I think feel aggrieved and like they're in the minority, but they're not actually. So we'll talk about that. Disclaimer here, I am just responding to the things that people provided as their unpopular opinions. The great thing about this in the first video was I largely managed to stay out of any kind of salty opinion of my own because I was just responding to yours. These are ones where I'm gonna feel the need to discuss them a little bit more, so I may be getting a little opinionated or salty up in here. If you don't like that kind of video, then why are you watching it? Click off right now. You have my permission. Here you go. Click off. Bye. Have a lovely day. Best of luck to you today. So now that people who don't like these kind of videos are now gone, we're going to move on. And so I've broken this down into three categories. One is kind of meta discussions. The second is tropes and genres. And the third are specific books and authors' opinions. So let's start with one meta thing that came up a couple of times. Is kind of circling around the idea of like books that are woke or own voices. So the first one, I'm going to read this and I can tell that this is a really hot take, but I have not read the book in question, so I have no specific thought about it. And then this next one we'll talk about. So the first kind of comment I got in this category is, call me when a booktuber has the guts to point out the unaddressed hypocrisy inside some famously woke books. I'm looking at you, the hate you give. I've not read this book, so I don't know. But then this person says, of course, that will probably land you in hot water. So let me repeat how Kalina is stupid and annoying, because that's still the tea in 2019. I don't know what any of those references are, but so basically when a booktuber has the guts to point out unaddressed hypocrisy inside famously woke books. And then the next one is, woke stuff / own voices stuff gets me riled up. Now you're going to tell authors what they're allowed to imagine or not, and tell readers what they should be reading and which book is more legit and because it's woke or own voice. So here's my reaction to that. First, I want to say the things I agree with in here. One, I do think that sometimes books, and I don't know the books in question here, but let's just broaden this out. I do think sometimes books that are own voices, or at least are positioned that way in its marketing, to be totally honest, do sometimes get a pass for having progressive ideas in one area and not in another. So I will agree that if there's a book, like let's just grab from the grab bag here. Let's say that there's a book that is famously, oh, actually, you know what? Here we go. Ooh, I got some tea for you. Let's pick an influencer who I think embodies this very well. Jeffree Star. So Jeffree Star gets defended often because he has truly been a pioneer for men in makeup online, for being very gender fluid online, and really, I mean, like, just the amount of success that he has gotten for himself, like as an out gender fluid gay man, I think is really inspiring to people and causes people to feel very defensive of him and like they want to say yes to that part of him. But he also has very problematic things he has done surrounding race and surrounding women, like misogyny. And I think that it becomes very hard to have a nuanced conversation about him because people are either, they can't see anything good about him or they can't see anything bad about him. So like in that sense, I'm going to agree that I think that we have to have more capability to see things as nuanced, see authors as imperfect people who can be good at some things and bad at other things, and the same for books. So I want to say yes to that. And I also want to say that I am somebody who believes that something being own voices doesn't give it a pass in terms of quality or in terms of, sorry, I just broke my chain of thought because a spider literally just started coming down on his web and I crushed it like a mother. I let the bugs live if they're outside. If they come into my house, they've signed their own death warrant. Anyway, I forgot what I was saying. I think I was basically trying to say, like, I want to say yes to some of the things that these comments are addressing in terms of just like, I don't think it's interesting or helpful for something to be labeled as woke, diverse, own voices, and therefore making a book or an author beyond critique. I think that that's fair. I guess here's where I want to start, especially in the second part of this comment, telling readers what they should read and what book is more legit. I think that that's a straw man. I don't think that's what people are saying. And if what they're saying is that there are people who think that you, like, if there's somebody out there who thinks that if I wanted to write a book that included a Black character, a trans character, or whatever character, because I am not those things, I couldn't write about it. If somebody actually has that opinion, then I would disagree with it, because I think accept that as a limitation on what people can write. Now, I think to do some of those things well requires a lot more work on the person who's doing the writing. So if that's actually something people argue or believe, then I guess, but I think that that's a straw man. And I often don't really, like, as soon as somebody starts straw manning things, it gets really hard for me to listen to the rest of their opinion, because I'm like, I don't think that you're actually engaging with the underlying critique of what the entire push for woke, it's not even woke, I should stop saying that, push for own voices or books that have progressive sensibilities to them, or like sensibilities of like, hey, guess what? People besides like upper middle class / rich, white, cis men deserve to have their stories told, and told by people who understand those experiences. Like, I don't, what I'm sensing, at least part in one of these comments, is a resistance to that being something that needs to be addressed. And I guess I just disagree with that. Like, if you never see yourself in stories, you might feel differently, probably is what I would tell that person. So anyway, I guess I have some things that I would agree with in sort of the gist of part of these comments, but one of them I really think is very strongly based on a straw man, and therefore it's hard for me to take the entirety of that opinion very seriously, because one thing I really like, when people have hot takes, one of the main things that I'm looking for is that they have really engaged with what the other side of who they disagree with has said. And if what you says suggests that you haven't really grappled with it, it feels very like, get off my lawn, and I just am not that interested in listening to the rest of the thought process there. So anyway, that was a meta one. Now let's get into tropes and genres, and really there were 3 genres that came up as being unpopular to dislike. So let's talk about each of those in turn. Actually, let me amend that, because one of these is getting into why people don't like a genre. So a good summary of these ones is why is romance the redheaded stepchild of the reading community? That's a minority opinion I do agree with. I think it's been interesting this year. I think there's been a lot more visible romance content here on BookTube. So I feel like fellow romance readers are coming out of the woodwork. There's, I think, increasingly less of a stigma on liking romance, but it is the redheaded stepchild of the reading community because of misogyny and internalized misogyny, to be totally honest, because the same story. And when people say, well, I'm allowed to just not like a genre, that's fine. What I'm talking about is the reason people don't like romance, or like the stated reasons that they don't like romance, and or the reason some people choose not to talk about the fact that they read romance, are incredibly gender coded. I think an analogous genre to romance would be something like action adventure. Those are aimed at primarily male audiences, and there is not the same, and they frankly have the same number of sex scenes or like sexual content in them. The difference being one of them is aimed at men and doesn't have an explicitly like emotional content to those books and to the sexuality being represented, and one is aimed at women and does have an emotional component usually to the sexuality that's being represented. So that's what I mean, that it is at some level a gender-coded stereotype or stigma. So it's fine to not like romance. I'm just going to submit that the reason why a lot of people don't actually like romance is because there's some level of, oh, those are books for women and I'm a man, I can't read those. Oh, those are books for women and like things that women like are not good. Or, oh, there's like emotions and sex, that's just a fantasy. Meanwhile, I'm going to read this action adventure thing where homeboy has clearance in every single intelligence agency in the world, has, you know, kicked butt in every single infamous terror agency in the world. I mean, it's like, that's also a fantasy. It's just one that's aimed towards men instead of women. So I'm gonna stand up and say that I agree with that minority opinion that romance is still sort of a second-class citizen genre. on the bookish internet. But the good news is that I do think that that's changing, and I'm excited to see more and more people who like romance. I'm not saying people who don't like it need to make themselves like it, but people who like it, I think, are increasingly feeling the freedom to say that they like it and talk about it. Then there are several people in here talking about how they don't like fantasy. And I think that's really interesting, actually, because I'm not sure that there's many other places where people who didn't like fantasy novels would feel like they were the unpopular ones. I think that fantasy, more so fantasy than sci-fi, but maybe a little bit of both, are somewhat overrepresented on the bookish internet. I don't know if that's just a function of the readership of book blogs and booktube and whatever, but yeah, like I can see how you would feel like you were in the minority opinion if you didn't like fantasy on the bookish internet. There are a lot of people who really like it. So yeah, I can see where that comes from. I do like fantasy. It's not like my #1 genre, but I do read something fantasy-y, like 1 or 2 of those a month. But yeah, I can see where people are coming from on that. And then we come to the part of this response that made me the most uncomfortable. And I think we're gonna need to step back and have like a quick meta conversation about a boundary I would like to draw here on my channel in general with comments. This is not gonna be fun. Okay, let's just get into this. There were so many comments talking about how people don't like YA novels. Some of them were completely like just a taste thing of like, somebody mentioned like, I wish that I liked fantasy and YA because it's hard to talk about books with friends at school because that's what they want to talk about. Like, I get that. Some of them were just very to the point. I don't want to hear about YA. Another one was not into YA, never have been even when I was a teen, and I don't understand why it's so popular. Those are all things that I'm like, fine hearing. Those are just like stating your taste. I did get, however, a number of comments or unpopular opinions talking about other people and their basic intelligence level for liking YA. So a boundary that I would just like to go ahead and set here is that I do get comments sometimes from people who find my channel, and one of the things that they want to communicate to me, and I think this is a valid thing to communicate, is, hey, there's so much YA on BookTube, and I'm glad to find somebody who doesn't primarily or only read YA. I get it. I had the same deal when I was first getting into BookTube, trying to find people who didn't like YA. However, sometimes people take it a step further and they kind of want to try to bond with me by putting people who do primarily or only read YA down and saying that I'm better, or I don't really know what they're trying to accomplish with these comments, but they make me very uncomfortable. And it's basically the equivalent of not like other girls, but for BookTube. So it's like, oh, you're not like those other channels. You don't just read this trash YA or primarily read this trash YA that we all know adults shouldn't be reading. And like, it's an uncomfortable thing to say to me because A, I do read some YA. I think I was looking at the stats the other day. I think about 8% of what I've read this year has been YA. So I do read some YA. I don't think I'm an idiot. I am an adult. And then second, you're also making comments about people who I am good friends with on BookTube who do read at least 50% YA. And I can tell you that they're intelligent people who have their own reasons for reading what they want to read. I guess where I struggle with this entire mindset of like judging adults for liking to read YA, there's like a myriad of factors. One, let's use an example from my life. If you were to judge my literacy, intelligence level, whatever, based purely on my taste in TV shows, I think you would have a very different judgment of what I'm like, etc., than you maybe do from watching this. Because I watch 5 TV shows. I watch Stranger Things. I watch new, like ones that I'm currently watching, like keeping up with. Stranger Things, Real Housewives of New York, Great British Bake Off, Queer Eye, and RuPaul's Drag Race. That's it. So, I mean, I would look at somebody who watched those things and think they were awesome because I love all of them and I have thoughts about all of them. But like, I watch TV purely for like escapism and purely for like relaxing, like I don't want strong narrative threads in TV. I really like reality TV, as you can see from that little lineup. I have a very specific way that I use TV in my overall media diet. Different people read for different reasons. So somebody could be getting their PhD in stats. I just thought that because one of my best friends just finished doing that. But she just got her PhD in stats and she works at, she's brilliant. And if she, I don't totally know what all she's reading these days, but if you found out that she read only YA, you might have, like, to have the judgment on her of like, oh, she doesn't have good critiquing skills. That was what somebody said. Or she's just trying to relive adolescent fantasies. It's just like such a ridiculous judgment on somebody that I don't understand. Like, it's specifically YA. It gets people really worked up and it creates this cycle because there's just as many people on BookTube who don't read or like YA. Like, there's plenty of people out there. But I think that it creates the cycle because people who read YA feel very defensive against what I would agree are just like comments that are unneeded or out of line. Like, I don't know why people need to be so unkind towards other people's reading tastes, but there's this, and then there's this, like, it just creates this cycle where people feel defensive and defensive. And so that just creates a lot of like confusion. And it's an unnecessary, and I don't know. I guess I would just tell you, like, so few people actually read in this world. Like, relative to the number of people who are literate, the number of people who routinely read books for pleasure are not that many. I am tickled to death if anybody is reading for pleasure. Frankly, in the US, given the state of our public education system these days, honestly, some people even can come out of college and not be able to comfortably read beyond a YA or new adult level. There are some people who that's like what their reading level is, and the fact that they are choosing to continue to read is wonderful. And like, I just want to encourage them to do that. There's other people who, like I said, were getting a PhD and maybe just don't need to read really difficult things for pleasure. Like, they just don't want to do that. That's also fine. Like, I just think that you don't know the full story of why somebody does or doesn't read what they read. And you know, you can make observations like, do I think that people who try to sell me that like the majority of YA is super high quality from like an objective, whatever that means, literary standard? Like, no, I'm not really buying that argument. I read enough YA that I don't think that that's the majority of what's being produced. That's okay. Like, any well-functioning genre has levels of like high literary to pulp. And that's the way genre works. Think of mystery. There's super pulpy mystery. There's also like ton of French or like Wilkie Collins. I mean, like, there's a range, and that's totally fine. I think people who try to pretend that the YA genre exists only here or only here are both kidding themselves. And I just wish we could stop being so mean to each other. Like, leave Brittany alone. I guess that's what it boils down to. I hope I edit this into something coherent. I guess what I want to say is that if you don't like YA, that is totally fine. I think that it's probably fair to see yourself as somewhat of a minority opinion on BookTube in particular, because BookTube really grew out of the YA community. I will tell you, however, there are plenty of people on BookTube who don't read YA. So if you don't want to encounter YA, I would suggest like looking for reviews of some of your favorite books, seeing the booktubers who reviewed them, and then you'll get a really good working list of people who you might enjoy their content more. So I guess I would just say, in summary, everybody needs to put their guns down. I think that there needs to be a level of not assuming that you can know things about people based purely on their reading taste. You can have your opinions, that's fine, but I do want to set the firm boundary of like, please don't try to bond with me over the fact that you don't like YA. Like, I'm not really comfortable with that. It makes me feel really awkward as somebody who's friends with people who really like reading YA. Like, it feels like you're asking me to agree that they're dumb, and I don't like that feeling. And then just in general, I would say if you're a real hardliner on how YA is like ruining people's lives, maybe chill out a little bit is kind of where I'd land on that. Let's move on, shall we? Okay, that was a journey. We now come to the books and authors section of this, and I'm gonna just do this as rapid fire as I can. First of all, The Book Thief. I got 3 different things on The Book Thief talking about being pretentious and gimmicky, strong message but overhyped, not very good. I wouldn't say it's not very good. I think I would most align with this strong message but a bit overhyped and the gimmick piece. I think that that's why this has ended up being such a resonant title in YA Holocaust literature, but there's plenty of excellent YA Holocaust literature. So I'm not really sure why this one really connected as much as it did, other than kind of that gimmick of death as the narrator. So there you go. I guess I tend to agree with that. I don't get why Brandon Sanderson is touted as this genius of epic fantasy. Oh, why are you doing this to me? Why do I have to put this in here? These fans are awful. Sorry, if you like, there's some lovely Sanderson fans, but there's also some real fantasy dude bro Sanderson fans, and I don't want them in my comments. Okay, okay, I'll finish reading this opinion. It's this person's opinion. I didn't say this, even though I kind of agree with it. His books read like mediocre YA. I wouldn't say mediocre, but I would say the one book I've attempted to read definitely read like YA. I have absolutely nothing against YA, but when something is sold to me as epic fantasy, that for adults, I expect a different level of writing and character development. That is exactly how I feel. And then somebody just said Way of Kings sucks. I've not read Way of Kings, so I have no idea. But in general, I think I need to give Sanderson, I don't want to give him another chance though, to be totally honest, guys. I don't want to have to deal with Fantasy Drew Bros in my comments. Okay, sorry, moving on. Okay, I hate Jane Eyre a lot. I don't think there's anything romantic about Jane Eyre. Okay, so if I love Jane Eyre. It's my all-time favorite book, so I feel very attacked. Is there nothing romantic about Jane Eyre? I'm just gonna have to disagree. Like, I know in my head that there's reasons not to love Rochester, but my heart doesn't agree with those reasons. And I will tell you, after studying it as a part of my thesis, I think that the sort of general take on how Jane Eyre ends is not really a faithful reading of the text. And so I think that there's a better argument for Rochester. I don't know. I just think that especially with the distance of time, we've lost some of the nuances of what Charlotte Bronte was trying to do with Rochester. Anyway, Jane Eyre I love, so that made me feel real sad. Now I know how all these upset Sanderson fans are right now. Oh, okay, this one's sad too. Pride and Prejudice is highly overrated. Pride and Prejudice took me 3 attempts to finish because it's so dull. Lizzie Bennet is not the best Jane Austen heroine, and the other ladies of the Austen universe deserve more love. Okay. Okay, next. The author Rainbow Rowell is highly overrated. After reading a few books from her, I just don't get the hype around Rainbow Rowell. That second comment is exactly how I feel. Next is a book I've not yet read, but I do have the audio of and plan to read at some point. Strange the Dreamer was poorly plotted and poorly paced. While I don't think it's a bad book, I also think purely flowery writing does not a good book make. Strange the Dreamer was boring. So I think that is a hot take. I'll see how I do with it at some point. Similarly for the next, I have yet to read Song of Achilles, but I thought Circe was just pretty average, and I could not get myself to care about her as a character. I thought Circe by Madeline Miller was super boring and didn't care for the writing, which was disappointing because I love Song of Achilles. So different takes there on Song of Achilles, but both of them thinking Circe was pretty dull or middle of the road. Also one on my TBR, so we'll see how I do with it. Don't know if I agree or disagree with that. Sarah J. Maas is not a good author. She cannot write an interesting character, a good plot, or a healthy romance. She can only write one kind of guy, which is someone who does not treat their partner well. And all of her books have war in them because she can't think of another fantasy plotline. Sarah J. Maas should never write battle, boring and predictable due to Deus Ex Machina, nor sex scenes. Cringe. I've only read A Court of Frost and Starlight. Is that what that was called? Basically, that was a book of Christmas shopping and banging. It read like it was okay, pulpy fantasy romance. So that's all I've read of her so far. We'll see if I do more. She's another one that I kind of dread reading more from because I just don't want to have to deal with her fans, to be totally honest with you. So we'll see if I ever do anything more with her. I hated Dark Matter and am baffled that everyone loves it so much. All Blake Crouch main characters are Gary Stews. So I have Pines and Dark Matter on my Kindle and would like to read them at some point because I have heard almost universally good things, but this makes me think that there may be some minority opinions out there that don't think he's that great. So I don't know, we'll see. Next is Nevernight is bad. Pretentious banter, cringy sex scenes. I don't get the hype. And then J. Kristoff plus pretentious writing style is overrated. So again, I think this is a good example of minority opinion because I don't know if the pretentious adjective is one that I would append here, but I will say that when I attempted to read Nevernight, even though the plot, like the setup was very much like up my alley, it didn't do anything for me really. The writing, the authorial voice was the barrier to me continuing on in that book. I ended up DNFing it. So I guess I'll have to say I agree that his writing style doesn't seem to work for me that well. I do have a couple of his other books from other series that I'm hoping to try. So we'll see if I can do better with other ones. But yeah, I guess I agree that is a minority opinion, but it is one that I've seen some of. So I would say it's like a 30% minor. There's like a 70-30 split, I think, in people who read him. And I think these people are in that 30%. And then finally, just a bunch of hate on Wuthering Heights. I hate Wuthering Heights. It's not romantic, but creepy and bordering on necrophilic. Wuthering Heights is a mess. Wuthering Heights is quite dull. I like Wuthering Heights. I wonder if I would have liked it if I hadn't read it as a teen. I think anybody who's trying to read it as a romance is like fundamentally missing the point of it. So that I will agree with. I don't think it's a mess, but I could see the dull. Like, I could see that. So yeah, I think that rounds out all of the hot takes I had to go through. Like I mentioned, this one had a little bit more tea in it. I felt like this was a good opportunity for me to address the whole YA thing. So I'm imagining a lot of this video is me talking about that just based on the filming time. But it is something I really struggle with because I totally understand people not liking YA and being excited that I'm a channel that doesn't primarily talk about it. Like, I get that, but it does put me in a weird position when people essentially like put people down who do like YA and try to bond with me over it. It just feels weird and I don't like it. But anyway, besides that, I would love to hear from other people in the comments what you think about some of the things we went over today. I'm gonna give you a Mr. Rogers moment and remind everybody to be kind to one another because this is literally just nerdy book opinions. Surely there are other things that we could waste our cruelty or unkindness towards others on other than this. So please, just be nice. If you're not being nice, I'm gonna moderate. So totally allowed to disagree. Just don't be a dick. That's what it boils down to. If you think to yourself, am I being a dick right now? Maybe just hit the backspace key and say, no, I don't want to be a dick today. That's the only thing I put in place, but I would genuinely like to hear from people what they think about some of the things that we were talking about today. If you agree with my kind of breakdown of unpopular versus like a minority opinion, anything, just let me know what you thought in the comments. And yeah, I think that will do it. So if you like this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all of that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye.